there is still a scenario, albeit an unlikely one, where the Jaguars could get into the playoffs even if they lose to the Titans next week. So that would require them to, one, beat the Houston Texans this week. Two, the Dolphins need to lose to the Patriots and the Jets. Very possible. The Jets need to lose to the Seahawks this week, and then, of course, beat the Dolphins in Week 18. Maybe not likely, but conceivable. And the Bills need to beat the Patriots in Week 18. I'd say that is likely. The Steelers need to lose to the Ravens in Week 17, and then lose to the Browns in Week 18. It is a lot.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome into Monkey Knife Fight's NFL Week 17 preview show. I'm Dan Watkins. Joining me, Nick Whalen of Rotowire.com. Nick, happy Fantasy Football Championship weekend to you, my friend. How's it going?
It's going well. It's going well. I mean, obviously, we're going to get into the Jags at some point here, but for the first time all year, I could say that the Jags are in first place in the AFC South. They control their own destiny. Got some kind of weird games on the schedule this week, especially pertaining to that AFC South race. First and foremost, Cowboys Titans tonight. But Jags got to take care of business against the Texans, and that is one of just several major games on this schedule. So, looking forward to breaking it down with you as usual.
Yeah, so this is how twisted my mind has become now after doing these shows with you. Are you worried at all that your little fun fact that you've thrown out on this show, on this program multiple times, that the Jaguars primetime Sunday night, Monday night drought could be coming to an end next week? We don't know the Week 18 schedule yet as far as where times go, but that Jags-Titans game, no matter what happens, no matter what combination of wins, losses, or ties, this Sunday in Week 17, that game is going to decide the AFC South.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, honestly, that's not something that I had considered, but you're right. It certainly could be flexed into the Sunday night spots. I don't really know how the NFL has handled the Saturday games in the past. I guess they could put that one as a standalone game on Saturday as well, but you're right. I mean, the 11-year streak of no true primetime games for the Jags could be in serious jeopardy, although I think they've shown enough over the second half of this season that they probably throw them a bone. Maybe they get like a low key Sunday night game, like Week 13 or something next year. I see that drought ending in the very near future. Before we dig in on these MKF lines, Dan, I've been trying to spread the news here. Like, a lot of people are asking me, like, the Titans are resting their starters tonight. Will the Jags do the same? They don't need to beat Houston. Technically, that's right. They all that matters is this Titans game in Week 18 when it comes to the division. However, there is still a scenario, albeit an unlikely one, where the Jaguars could get into the playoffs even if they lose to the Titans next week. So that would require them to, one, beat the Houston Texans this week. Two, the Dolphins need to lose to the Patriots and the Jets. Very possible. The Jets need to lose to the Seahawks this week, and then, of course, beat the Dolphins in Week 18. Maybe not likely, but conceivable. And the Bills need to beat the Patriots in Week 18. I'd say that is likely. The Steelers need to lose to the Ravens in Week 17 and then lose to the Browns in Week 18. It is a lot that has to happen, but to me, Dan, not a single one of those events is like inconceivable. Like, it's not out of the realm of possibility that it could happen. So I think the Jags take care of business, and they make a point to beat Houston. I don't think they're going to throw this game away. Yeah,
I wouldn't at all. I mean, especially with the way they're playing right now, everything's going well. Why risk mucking that up by playing a bad game on Sunday? But just looking ahead, though, back to Week 18 next week, there's only we're waiting to see what that primetime game is going to be. Everything is on Sunday next week, but there's only 3 games I can see being flexed into that spot. You potentially could have Bengals, Ravens for the AFC North. Those teams are both already in the playoffs, though, so maybe you don't throw them on primetime. Packers, Lions could be very likely. That could be the battle for the 7th seed in the NFC, depending on what happens this weekend. And then you have that Jags-Titans game, which, I mean, no matter what, that is a win and get in game next week.
Yeah, that is true. Several options. And to be clear, there are 2 games on Saturday. I know the way the schedule is presented, it's misleading. But yeah, there will be 2 games on Saturday, one at 4:30 Eastern and then one night game on Saturday. And again, I don't know how the league's going to do that. It all depends on how Week 17 shakes out and how many meaningful games there are. Obviously, the whole point of this is, if one team is waiting on the result of another team, they don't want to give them that advantage and potentially make what could be a meaningful game meaningless. So a lot of moving pieces, but there will be 2 games Saturday.
All right, very good. Did not know that. I thought they always did everything on Sunday for the final week with the peak chaos. But anyways, Speaking of chaos, the Denver Broncos, they have fired Nathaniel Hackett this week. That coaching experience is over. Hackett joins Urban Meyer and Bobby Petrino as the only two coaches this century to get fired during their first season. Going back to this hiring, they haven't flat out said it, Nick, but they hired Hackett because they thought they were getting Aaron Rodgers, right?
To me, that's very clear. Yes, 100%. I think that's exactly what happened. And I at the time, even when they didn't get Rodgers, I think there was enough belief that this could still work out. I don't remember really anybody questioning Nathaniel Hackett's credentials, other than the fact that he's inexperienced and has never coached before. Like coming into the season, I don't remember anybody saying, yeah, I really like the Broncos, but I think this coach is going to be a disaster. Like that was not really the case at all. So I think it's a little revisionist to go back and say that this was a bad hire. And look, if it resulted in them getting Aaron Rodgers instead of Russell Wilson, I think this season plays out quite a bit differently. But the Wilson situation aside, I mean, that is going to be something that the franchise has to reckon with, likely for a while, given what they gave up to get him, given the contract situation. That's a whole separate deal. I think even if Wilson was playing well, it was clear to me that Hackett was not the guy. There was, from week one onward, it was just clear that there was a baseline level of competency and confidence that was missing. So I'm interested to see, how Denver responds these next couple of weeks. But telling to me that the defensive coordinator declined the interim title, to me, that he was just like, look, I don't want any part of this. They're going with a guy who was out of the league for like 5 years before Nathaniel Hackett brought him in as their interim coach. So I don't think it really changes anything in the short term. Obviously, it's a lost year for the Denver Broncos, but you read off the list. I mean, Nathaniel Hackett, he's on the Mount Rushmore of failed head coaches. He's absolutely in that category.
There's actually one, if we're going Mount Rushmore, there's one spot left. So maybe we can have the third straight year next year with a coach not even making it to the end of the first season.
Yeah, right. Well, we'd have to look up how many coaches were fired after their first season, because there has to be plenty who didn't make it to a second season. But I think not even making it through your first season, that's a really tough thing to pull off.
Steve Wilkes with Arizona, the Josh Rosen year.
I think Jim Tomsula.
Yep, Jim Tomsula. Pete Carroll with the Jets back in 1994 was one. I went through like the whole list, and there are some great names on the list of the 1 year, one and done coaches. But staying in the AFC West, some interesting situations going on in Las Vegas. Where do you want to see Derek Carr play football next season?
Where do I want to see Derek Carr play football? There's so much to unpack with this situation and how it affects guys like Davante Adams. I think the Colts are kind of the obvious team. That would be like their seventh different quarterback in 7 years. They've been on this carousel for over half a decade at this point. So I think they're going to be in the mix. I think the New York Jets is really interesting. And it does kind of feel like Mike White has an extended audition here. Like if he plays really well and the Jets get into the playoffs and, even if they don't win a playoff game, if they look good, I think there's a decent chance that they try to roll with Mike White. Obviously you have him for cheap, so that's a big advantage. But I think the Jets are kind of that ready-made team where, Derek Carr, is he ever going to be a top 5 to 7 quarterback in the league? Probably not. I think that ship has sailed. I think this season kind of told us a lot about who Derek Carr is, but is he a huge, huge upgrade over Zach Wilson? Yes. Is he an upgrade on balance over Mike White? Absolutely. And with Derek Carr, I think this Jets team is probably already comfortably in the playoffs. So, you get Breece Hall back next year. The defense should be just as good. Pretty much everybody takes a step forward. A lot of good young players on that team. I think Derek Carr to the Jets would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, the Colts situation is interesting, but I feel like Derek Carr might be too young for them, because don't you have to pretty much be on your football deathbed to become the quarterback of the Indianapolis Colts these days? I mean, Phillip Rivers, Matt Ryan, Carson Wentz. Carson Wentz is now starting against Nick Foles. Yeah, you got to be a little older, I think, to be the quarterback in Indy. I'd love to see him go to Houston, continue the Carr family legacy with the Houston Texans. I think that would be a good spot for him. But my favorite thing I've been reading with this whole Derek Carr situation is the people that are like, well, his time in Vegas might not be over. It's like, it's over, man. This is like in a relationship, right? You take a break with your significant other, and 99 times out of 100, it's over. It's just, you're just like prolonging the full breakup here. And now the world gets to see the Jared Stidham era for the Raiders. Nearly 3 years after us here in New England, we were told that, he's the guy. He's going to take over for Brady. And then it never happened. Instead, we were stuck with watching Cam Newton. But any thoughts on Stidham for Sunday?
Well, first of all, I love the girlfriend analogy with Carr. I think in that scenario, Devontae Adams is like the dog that you get together, and then you have to decide what to do. That, you assumed you would just own it together for the next 15 years. So yeah, we'll see. There's going to be big time ramifications. And look, Derek Carr, I don't think he's coming back. I mean, if you read into it, all the Raiders writers are basically saying this is it. But he does really want to be in Vegas. It seems like he would have to accept a much cheaper contract. I mean, it would be pretty embarrassing on his side, but I don't think we could completely close that book. On Stidham, you've probably watched him closer than I did during the New England days. I mean, he's one of those guys that if you follow college football and you follow recruiting, he's a name that always comes up, and he's always going to kind of get the benefit of the doubt. It's kind of like Jeff Driscoll to me, where you're like, oh, I remember that name. He was really good in high school. Maybe he'll be good in the NFL. And there hasn't really been a ton of evidence to support that. To me, does this really feel like an audition for Stidham, or is it just he happens to be the backup quarterback and they didn't want to get Derek Carr hurt? Like, are they truly trying to see what they have in him? Are they considering him as a potential starter next year? I don't really think so.
The only reason I would say it could be is because Josh McDaniels is the head coach of the Raiders. He was his offensive coordinator in New England, so maybe he knows a little more than everybody else does. I would assume he does. But yeah, just going back to when Brady left and all of the reports, Jarrett Stidham's going to be able to take over. Jarrett Stidham's the guy. He's got the arm. It was if he was in the 2020 draft or whatever, he would have been a top 5 pick. Just absurd things were said about Jarrett Stidham going back to that spring and looking back, and he never really got a full chance in New England because of some stuff that was going on off the field. But yeah, he's going to get a chance, and he gets to play the 49ers on Sunday. So let's talk a little bit about the battle for some final playoff spots. We got 3 division titles that are still up for grabs: the AFC North, the AFC South, and the NFC South. That final wild card spot in the AFC, Pats Dolphins game could go a long way in determining that one. The Giants, they can clinch a playoff spot with the Colts. And then there's that final NFC wildcard spot. Washington, they could clinch with a win and a lot of help as well. But maybe something you've been hinting at for the past couple of weeks, the surging Green Bay Packers. How are you feeling? Could they sneak? Are they going to sneak in?
Oh boy. Look, if I had to say yes or no, I would say no. I think it's still more unlikely than likely that they do not make it. One, they need to beat the Minnesota Vikings this week, and I don't know if that happens. I'll tell you what, in our picks on Rotowire, I picked against Green Bay. I really don't think they've played that well. They've won 3 straight. 2 of those wins came over the Bears and the Rams. Those don't really count. Those are bad teams. And I don't think they played well last week against Miami. I think they were gifted 3 easy interceptions that I don't even really credit as takeaways. They were thrown directly to Packers defensive backs. They were almost doubled up in terms of yards per play in that game. That gave up an 84-yard touchdown to Jalen Waddle. So I think they're going to be in trouble here against a Minnesota offense that's going to be able to move the ball, especially through the air on that secondary. So unless Green Bay can magically get this offense figured out and score with Minnesota, I don't actually like their chances to win this game at home. So there's that. And then on top of that, they need either the Giants to lose both of their last 2 games. Unlikely. They play Indy and Philly. Or they need the Commanders to lose one of their last 2. And that's going to get really dicey here because, for one, the Packers are going to know the result of that game by the time their Week 17 matchup kicks off in the late afternoon. I think the Commanders need to lose this week specifically. And they're playing the Browns, who have been just awful since Deshaun Watson took over, because Week 18, the Commanders play Dallas. On paper, tough matchup. Very good chance Dallas isn't playing for anything at that point, and it could just be a free victory for the Commanders. So, it feels like everything maybe is coming down to Week 18, but really I think it's Week 17 that's ultimately going to determine that final spot.
So speaking of Week 17, it is just a horrendous slate. When I first read our rundown that Brian sent to us yesterday before recording the show, and he's just like, this is just a brutal slate. And I took a deeper look. It really is.
I thought that rundown was a prank by Brian.
Yeah, no, we're just basically just trying to scrounge up some fantasy guys to talk about here. But we do have some good ones. Let's start in the 1 o'clock window, as we usually do. Trevor Lawrence at the Houston Texans, 255.5 is his more or less on MKF. He's reached this number in 8 of 12 games, including the previous matchup where he finished with 286. But as we kind of hinted at, any concern that Jacksonville might be overlooking Houston this week, and just all eyes on that matchup with Tennessee next week?
So I'm not concerned about overlooking Houston. One, they've already lost to Houston. I think they want to avenge that. As we laid out earlier, there is still a scenario where they could make the playoffs as a wild card. So I'm not really worried about this being a trap game for Jacksonville. And beyond that, Houston does not want to win this game as a franchise. They want to hold on to the number one pick. The Bears are closing in. They only have a half game lead at this point. So this is kind of a must lose for Houston, especially with the Bears, playing at Detroit. So I don't really see that being an issue. However, when it comes to fantasy, when it comes to sites like MKF, I'm going all unders on the Jags because while I don't think they rest their starters, if they're up 20-3 going into the fourth quarter, or if they're up 21-0 midway through the third, I think you're pulling Lawrence, you're pulling ETN, maybe you're limiting snaps for guys like Kirk and Zay Jones. So I think they do enough to make sure they win this game, but I don't think unless it's really close and Houston really shows up here, I think there's a pretty good chance that a lot of the Jags' premier players don't finish this game.
Who is Jacksonville's backup quarterback?
Oh, that is a great question. He came in last week and actually took a snap, and now all of a sudden his name is escaping me. Give me 1 second. CJ Beathard.
CJ Beathard. Ooh, yes.
Yeah, he got the deal down against the Jets.
Oh, very nice. Very nice. Yeah, I remember he had a couple good Monday night games for the 49ers.
Oh, yeah. Ex-Niner, yeah.
All right, let's move on. Let's talk about Denver at Kansas City. Patrick Mahomes, his number this weekend, 280.5. He's reached this number in 10 of 15 games, including throwing for 352 against Denver when they met a couple weeks ago. The Broncos, though, they do actually rank 6th against the pass this season, allowing 197 yards per game, more or less on Mahomes.
I'm going more. Obviously, we have some pretty major questions about the Denver defense that we have not had to answer this season because they have been so good despite the offense struggling. It kind of felt like, the levee broke last week, and that defense was just sick of supporting a terrible team all year. And all of a sudden the Rams put up 51 points. That's not going to happen again necessarily. Although if there ever was an opponent to do it, it might be KC. But I think this is a pedal to the metal game for the Chiefs because they will not know the result of Buffalo Cincy at this point. That's the Sunday night game. And, if you're Cincinnati, if you're Kansas City, you're still playing for the 1 seed in the AFC. If Cincinnati beats Buffalo, all of a sudden Kansas City is in the driver's seat for that 1 spot. So yes, this is a lopsided matchup. Yes, it could be a blowout, but I think Kansas City, they were up 27-0 on Denver just a few weeks ago, and the Broncos came back into that game. So I think this is a potential blowout scenario, and that probably means a big game for Mahomes.
A big reason that Denver did come back in that game a few weeks ago was Jerry Jeudy, who had 3 touchdowns in that game. Jerry Jeudy's number this week, 55.5 receiving yards. He's been over this number in 6 straight games. And of course, that last game against Kansas City, 8 catches, 73 yards, 3 touchdowns. And he's also coming off 117 yards a week ago, which was a season high. And that was with Cortland Sutton back. How do you feel about Jeudy on Sunday?
I think this is a very friendly number, 55.5, as you laid out. He's gone well over this number in most of his games of late. The quarterback situation is the main concern. Wilson versus Ripien. I assume it'll be Russell Wilson. I don't know if it even matters at this point. Those guys have been equally terrible. However, one thing we need to monitor with Jeudy is he did leave practice yesterday toward the end of practice, walked off the field with the trainers, was getting his ankle looked at. I think the expectation is that he's going to be limited the rest of the week. So if you're locking this in on Monkey Knife Fight, make sure you double check before kickoff on Sunday that he's 100% good to go because, in these situations, especially when you're talking over under player props, if you're at all worried about a guy's condition, it's like if he plays, that's all well and good, but you have to consider what are the chances that he tweaks it. If you take a hit to the wrong area, does he make it through the game? So if he's 100% healthy, I like the more, but as of right now with that ankle, I think I might go less just under the assumption that he might not make it through the game.
All right, let's head to the NFC South. Carolina at Tampa. We do the same spiel with Tom Brady every single week, so let's just skip TB12 on this one. Let's talk about Mike Evans instead. 65.5 receiving yards for Evans. He's reached this number in 6 out of 14 games, but just 1 time in his last 7. He did have 9 catches for 96 yards against Carolina back in week 7. He also dropped that big touchdown catch as well, so he could have been way over that number.
Yep.
83 yards away from 1,000 for the season. Do you think they try to get Big Mike there on Sunday?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the drop. That was his Christian Watson moment in that game, and yeah, would have had almost 200 yards in that game had he hauled that in. And that is one of those moments that it feels like was a major inflection point for this Buccaneers season. They end up losing that game 21-3. I'll tell you this: I hope that the Carolina Panthers win. As just a fan of watching football, I'm so sick of this Buccaneers team. I think they've been the hardest team to watch in the entire league. That includes the Rams. That includes the Cardinals. That includes the Texans. They're just so soul crushing every single week. With that said, I mean, this is a Panthers defense that has been pretty good all year. However, bottom 10 in the league in terms of fantasy points allowed to the wide receiver position. We know the script for Tampa Bay. They're going to try to run. They're not going to be able to run. Brady's going to end up throwing the ball 49 times. And somehow I think Mike Evans ends up going more here. It's not going to be pretty. It's just going to be a combination of a bunch of like 7-yard outs. But over the course of 4 quarters, I think he gets there.
All right, very good. And last, let's do Bears at Lions. Let's talk about Justin Fields, 68.5 rushing yards. He's reached 60, 69 or more in 7 of 14 games this season, including 147 yards on the ground against the Lions back in week 10. The Lions ranked 28th against the run this year, allowing 146 yards per game. And last week, Fields struggled to run the ball against Buffalo, just 11 yards in that loss.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. I mean, I'm inclined to my initial thought is to go more here. And, you mentioned the game that he had last time these teams met. Chicago should have won that game, by the way. Just a comedy of errors. I believe that was the Jeff Okudah pick 6 game that basically allowed the Lions to get their way back into it in the fourth quarter. My question is, at this point in the year, when your season is over, if anything, you probably want to lose to preserve your draft position. Are they going to run Justin Fields 15 to 20 times like they were in the middle of the season when he was really taking off? Last week against Buffalo, 7 rushes for 11 yards. That's down from, like I said, 15 to 18 during his peak weeks. I think the designed runs, it just doesn't make sense to put that wear and tear on Justin Fields in this situation. I think you're in preservation mode if you're the Chicago Bears. So obviously he's still going to scramble. Obviously there are going to be a few designed runs, but I see the Bears. I think they would be smart at least to limit the designed runs for Justin Fields. And to me, that pushes this under.
All right, very good. Let's head to the late window. Minnesota at Green Bay. Aaron Rodgers, 235.5 passing yards. He's reached this number in 5 of 15. Minnesota ranks 32nd, though, against the pass. They're dead last in the NFL, allowing 281.5 yards per game through the air. And also 4 of the last 5 games, they've allowed the opposing quarterback to reach 330 yards or more. Aaron Rodgers obviously hasn't had a 300-yard games this season, but could he go over 260 in this one for just the second time this year?
Well, I think we have to go more here by default. I mean, like you said, Minnesota's secondary gets worse and worse every week. And as we saw last week, for whatever reason, even though they were running the ball with a decent amount of success, the Packers just immediately went away from it. All they want to do is throw. Rodgers is just taking chances that he doesn't need to take. But that's how it goes. In these high leverage games, Rodgers wants the ball. He wants the control. And I think that's what we get this week. One thing that does worry me is I don't think Christian Watson is going to be available. He has not practiced all week, including today, dealing with that hip injury. To me, that takes away the home run threat. That takes away the one guy on this roster who, you could hit for a 70-yard touchdown, and all of a sudden you're a quarter of the way to that yardage prop. So that is a concern, but I think on volume alone against a bad secondary, Rodgers gets there.
Right, very good. I like the more here as well for Rodgers. Justin Jefferson, 95.5 receiving yards is his prop. 11 more, exactly. 11 of 15. He's hit this one 3 straight with 120 or more. Any reason to take the less?
Absolutely not. Packers secondary is terrible. The Packers, it's funny, they're dead last in the league in yards after the catch allowed, which seems like it would be a positive. But if you watch Green Bay, it's just because they play so far off that they'll just give you 15-yard completions. And yeah, they'll make the tackle right away, but they're offering very little resistance. I think this is a terrible spot for the Green Bay defense. I'm not expecting big things. I mean, Jefferson has 223, 123, 133 over his last 3 games. He's got 11 or 12 catches in all 3 of those games. I don't think that changes this week. He is the best receiver in football. He's the most dangerous skill position player in the league. I don't even think it's close at this point, which is saying a lot. If I as somebody who has a little bit of a rooting interest in Green Bay, I don't love this matchup at all. I think Jefferson goes wild.
All right. We got the Raiders are welcoming the 49ers to Las Vegas. The game could be ugly, but at least it's going to look good. This is by far and away the best uniform matchup of the weekend. So there's a compliment for you on that one. The Raiders, of course, in their silver and black, and those fantastic road jerseys for the Niners. How about Brock Purdy? 236.5 is what I'm seeing for his prop this week. He hasn't hit this number yet, but Vegas does rank 27th against the pass, allowing 244 yards per game. And now Chandler Jones is done for the year as well. So they lose their best pass, or one of their best pass rushers.
this could get very, very ugly. Very ugly. Niners are up to 9.5-point favorites on the road. I'm going to go less here because I don't think they need Brock Purdy to throw for 240 yards. I think if the 49ers could just kind of play their game, do what they do every week, bludgeon you on the ground, rip off a couple big plays early, and just let the defense take it from there. So, yeah, I mean, this could be a situation where we'll see if Deebo Samuel might even play for the Niners. I think that adds another weapon, on the ground as well. I think this could be a game where Purdy and some of the other guys are maybe not even finishing the game for San Francisco. I think this gets pretty ugly, and it's just a kind of a situation where they're running the ball 80% of the time in the second half.
All right. Speaking of running the ball, on the other side, you got Josh Jacobs, the NFL's leading rusher. 61.5 rushing yards, though, is his prop. He's hit this number in 12 of 15, but that San Francisco run defense is number one in the National Football League, allowing just 75 yards per game. The most that they have allowed to an individual running back this season, Nick, would be Caleb Huntley of the Atlanta Falcons. He ran for 59 yards back in week 6.
Yeah, I think we got to go less here. Yeah, that's a good pull on the Huntley stat. People forget the Falcons won that game by 2 scores. That was just kind of a weird no-show by the 49ers in a tough spot. But yeah, they are far and away the best defense in the league. They are allowing 2 fewer fantasy points per game than the next best defense. That is a huge margin. So yeah, this is a terrible spot for Jacobs. Obviously, if you're the 49ers, you feel more comfortable loading up against him because it's Jarrett Stidham at quarterback. I mean, there's just nothing really working in the Raiders' favor here. And by the way, a couple more notes on this Niners defense. They have gone 32 straight quarters without allowing more than 9 points in any individual quarter. They've allowed 7 or fewer in 31 of those 32. They have, on offense, more yardage than their opponent in 14 of 15 games, and they're averaging more yards per play in 13 of 15 games. I mean, I think it's maybe gone a little undercover just how dominant they've been.
They've been really good. I'm liking them a lot. And I think even at this point that Brock Purdy might be able to win a couple playoff games with the way that he's playing as well.
Oh, especially if you're getting Minnesota in round 2. Absolutely.
Yep. All right. Let's actually, one more thought on this game. How do you feel about Davante Adams here with Jarrett Stidham? And I'm asking personally too, because I have him in my matchup this week, and I'm like freaking out.
I mean, yeah, obviously you have to start him, right? You're not going to sit Davante Adams, but this could go in any direction, right? I don't know. I mean, he's obviously not happy that his quote unquote best friend, or I think his brother, as he described him on Instagram, got benched. So you wouldn't imagine that he's super motivated to go and show out with Jarrett Stidham, but at the same time, he's Davante Adams, and he's their best weapon by far, and really their only chance to hang around in this game. So I don't know. I mean, I don't think it's going to be as bad as last week, but I also don't think you can expect 11 catches for 160 yards and 2 touchdowns. I mean, you just got to throw them out there and see what happens. I wish I could give you better advice.
That's pretty much what I'm doing. It's tough times with Davante Adams on your fantasy team, especially as you head into the championship. One last guy here in this slate. Let's talk about Geno Smith, the Seahawks quarterback. 241.5 passing yards. I'm seeing his prop. 8 out of 15 games, he's hit this number. The Jets, though, that pass defense, they're top 5 in the NFL, allowing just 195 yards per game. How do you feel about Geno at home?
I think this is another really rough spot for Seattle, and I think their slide continues. With Mike White back, I think we're going to see a much more confident Jets offense. I think we're going to see a Jets offense that utilizes something called the forward pass, where you can actually throw the ball and then have a receiver catch it. That was not in play last week against Jacksonville. And look, I mean, the Seattle offense, the offensive line has been a complete disaster. I think that's been the number one reason why they've struggled. The defense has also taken a step back, but injuries also a big issue down the stretch. Tyler Lockett, there's been some rumblings that he's going to try to play this week. He didn't practice at all yesterday. I wouldn't really count on that. Marquise Goodwin, got hurt immediately last week. He's kind of their de facto number 2 right now. Noah Fant is banged up. Will Dissly's on IR. Literally every running back on their depth chart is considered questionable right now. So I just think this is a really tough spot. And going up against the Jets defense, that's going to be really motivated. I got to go less on Geno.
All right. Sunday night, we have the Ravens and the Steelers going at it. This one could be an ugly game as well. I'm glad I don't have any like taste of this game at all, except for maybe like the Ravens defense in this one. What about you? Anything fantasy wise that jumps out?
Well, we got to see what's going on with Lamar Jackson, right? The Ravens have not closed the book on that scenario, but I don't think he's going to start at this point. He's not practiced at all. And, this line is Ravens 2.5 at home. I think if Lamar was back, that would be up another couple points. So I think the expectation is that it's another Tyler Huntley game. The only real thing that's on the line here is the Mike Tomlin streak of non-losing seasons. And right. I actually think this will be a fun game to watch. I enjoy watching Pittsburgh, even though it's ugly. Love Mike Tomlin, love Harbaugh. Just always a fun matchup, even if it's a total of 35, which is the number in this game. But the decision to flex this one to me is really interesting. Obviously, the Steelers are going to draw, and that's the bigger focus here. But depending on what happens in the early games, the Steelers could be completely eliminated by the time this game comes around, and the Ravens have already clinched. So I thought there were some better options to perhaps put into that Sunday night window.
Yeah, I mean, just because this game, it historically always delivers just about. Yeah. So I guess that's why you throw it on there. It's a great rivalry, but we're far away from the days of Terrell Suggs, Ray Lewis, and James Harrison and Lamar Woodley on the other side going at it.
Unfortunately, we are.
Yeah.
Yes, we are.
Yes, we are. All right. I think that's going to do it for us this week, Nick, unless you have anything else.
No, man. Go Jags. Interested to see what we see from Josh Dobbs, that quarterback tonight for the Titans.
That's true. Yep. And somehow the Patriots could end up getting into the playoffs. I can't believe it. But anyways, thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget to subscribe on our YouTube page at Monkey Knife Fight. And good luck on your contest this week.